Today we are going to be starting a new chapter called Integer Operations, and here's the first section, 2.1, Integers and Absolute Values. The first thing we're going to do, we are going to put these integers on this number line. So we're going to start with -7. We're going to put -7 right on the number line. Then we're going to jump to 8, -3, 0, and 2. Now we have to order them from least to greatest. We know that the least number, these smaller numbers, are on the left side of the number line, and we have to move to the right side of the number line for the greater numbers. So we're looking at the dots. We first have a dot moving from left to right, least to greatest, on -7. So we have -7 is going to be our first number. -3 is our next, 0, 2, and 8. Next problem, we have to do the same thing. We have to put these integers on this number line. So we start with -4, a +9, a -6, -1, and 5. Again, we have to move from least to greatest, left to right. So the first dot moving from left to right, least to greatest, we have is -6. Then we have -4, -1, 5, and 9. Next is a vocab word that we have, and our vocab word is absolute value. Absolute value means the distance between a number and 0. So here we have the absolute value of -8. So we are looking for the distance between -8 and 0. So what we have to do is count all the numbers that we have in between -8 and 0. So let's do that. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 numbers are in between -8 and 0. So the absolute value of -8 is 8. These bars on the side of -8 represent the absolute value. Those bars on the side of -8 represent the absolute value. Next problem, we have a dot on 7. We have to see how many numbers there are between 7 and 0. We count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there are 7 numbers between 7 and 0. So the absolute value of 7 is 7. And finally, we have -3. How many numbers are there between -3 and 0? There are 3 numbers between -3 and 0. So the absolute value of -3 is 3. I want you to notice how all the absolute values are positive numbers. All the absolute values are positive numbers. Now we are looking for which number is greater. Now we have a +4 and a -6. We know that all positive numbers are going to be greater than all negative numbers. So therefore 4 is greater than -6. Now we have a -5 and a -7. They are both negative numbers, but now we have to think about this. If they are both negative numbers, and if I draw a number line and I put 0 here, and let's say here is -5 and here is -7, what number is going to be greater? When dealing with negative numbers, the number that is closest to 0 will be the bigger number. The number that is closer to 0 in the negative numbers will be the bigger number, the greater number. So therefore, -5 is greater than -7. Again, we have -1 and -10. What number is greater? We have -1 and -10. What number is, we have two negative numbers. Negative 1 is closer to 0, so therefore negative 1 is greater than 0. Now, we are supposed to write the opposite integer. So the opposite of negative 12 is just 12. We are jumping across 0 when it's asking for the opposite integer. We are just jumping across one side to the other side across 0. So write the opposite integer for 5 is going to be negative 5. We jumped across 0, landed on negative 5. And now we have to be careful here because the absolute value of negative 3 is positive 3, but the opposite of 3 is negative 3. And finally, moving on to some absolute values, the absolute value of negative 42 is positive 42. The absolute value of 42 is still a positive 42. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. Now we have to be careful when we have the absolute value of negative 5. We know the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, but we still have the negative in front, so we have to bring that down with it. So we have a negative 5. So when we have a negative absolute value, it's going to be a negative number. Here we have a absolute value of positive 3, which is 3. And now we have no absolute value. We have to look at these careful because these are parentheses. They are not absolute values. We have two negatives, and we know when we have two negatives, they make one really big positive. So here we have a positive 4. And that concludes section 2.1. Have a great rest of your day.